Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today I'm gonna be counting down my top 20 metal bands of all time. So far, there are quite a few bands I've listened to over the last few years, as I mentioned in my previous video, but I wanted to narrow it down to like a top 10 list, but there were too many, so I decided to go with a top 20 list. I'm looking at bands from all different genres of metal, so this list will be diverse to a certain extent. Please keep in mind, this is just my opinion and this is likely to change over the next few years or so. So strap yourselves in. Coming in at number 20 is Mayhem. Mayhem is a very interesting band because not only are they the founders of black metal, but they are possibly the most controversial and most notorious black metal band of all time, considering one of their founding members, Euronymous, was killed by Vagvakinus, I think that's how you pronounce his name, who is best known for the solo project Bosom. And their very first singer, who is known as Dead, he killed himself before they could even release their first album. But if you put all of that aside and just focus on the music itself, it's actually pretty good. Their debut album, De Mysteriis Dom Satanas, was a landmark in black metal. It was like the first black metal album ever, and it helped put Norway on the map in terms of metal. It's some of the earliest and most raw sounding traditional old school black metal you'll come across. On later albums, they dabbled in a lot of experimentation with avant-garde or spoken word metal, as some call it, some electronic elements, and even lo-fi. They did a whole album of lo-fi black metal, which is, low fidelity black metal. Eventually, they returned to their traditional black metal roots, but the production has been fantastic throughout most of their work, and I can't wait to see what they do next, because an entire culture was born thanks to them. Coming in at number 19, Metallica. Now, props to Metallica for their impact on the thrash metal scene and bringing heavy metal to the masses with the Black Album, where they quote-unquote sold out, which is rubbish. But yeah, their first 4 albums, which were all thrash metal albums, they're very important to the genre, and they're a lot of fun to listen to. When they, again, quote-unquote sold out, again, that's rubbish, with the Black Album, they did something a bit more mainstream, and it was the highest selling heavy metal album of all time, and I think it still is to this day. But I enjoy that kind of stuff as well. And they weren't afraid to experiment and, expand on their sound as a metal band, which alienated their longtime thrash metal fans. Well, not all of them, but some of them. But I think the problem is the end result was kind of a mixed bag. Load and Reload, where they explored country and southern rock and blues and all that stuff, wasn't for everybody. Then we have the whole Saint Anger thing. That's an album that, most people loathe to this day. Some people defend it, but yeah, it's considered to be the black sheep of their career. Well, one of the black sheep. That and an album called Lulu, which I could talk about one day in another video. And then they made their comeback with Death Magnetic, which was not just a return to their thrash metal roots, but a return to form for the band. They followed it up with Hardwired to Self-Destruct, and that was pretty good. And now they have a new album coming out, and I'm really looking forward to what they have to offer next. Coming in at number 18 is Blind Guardian. Now, these guys were the first metal band I think I ever, listened to. They are a power metal band that started out doing thrash metal, and then they transitioned into power metal, and, they began incorporating symphonic metal, neoclassical metal into their sound, and, they're a very diverse band considering what they're capable of. And they're from Germany, which is pretty cool. I think what really makes this band stand out is their lead singer, Hansi Kirch, who's been with the band from day one, and his voice never seems to age. They've done about 11 albums, and I think they have a 12th one on the way. If you're looking to get into power metal or symphonic metal, then give these guys a shot. Coming in at number 17 is Hammerfall. This was another power metal band that I took interest in, and they are one of the best power metal bands, not only in Sweden, but in the entire world. They are amazing. They can appeal to anybody, even if you're not really a metal fan. Just like Blind Guardian, they've done 11 albums. The lead singer, Joachim Cans, I think that's how you pronounce his name, I may have butchered it, I'm sorry. His voice hasn't seemed to age all that much either. They have this mascot on their album covers. I forgot what the name of it is. Oh, there we go. That was part of their image, part of their identity, and I love that. And when it comes to power metal in general, you know, these two bands that I've mentioned, Blind Guardian and Hammerfall, nothing will ever top them in my opinion. They are the best. So yeah, these guys are my number 17. Coming in at number 16 is Death. Now, it's debatable on who invented death metal. Some say Possessed, some say Death, and some say Slayer, who is going to be on this list, was somewhat of a pioneer as well. And I can agree with that, but for me personally, Death took everything that Possessed did and they built on it, and, you know, took the genre to another level at the time. Their debut album, Scream Bloody Gore, may have been a landmark for the band and for the genre of death metal, but it wasn't until their later albums that they began exploring the genre, expanding on their sound, pioneering technical death metal, progressive metal, and even melodic death metal to an extent, shifting away from the brutal, gory lyrics from their earlier albums and focusing on things like televangelism, religion, abortion, and stuff like that. Chuck Schuldiner, I think that's how you pronounce his name, the band's frontman and lead singer. He unfortunately died from brain cancer in 2001. May he rest in peace. His vocals were phenomenal, his guitar work was phenomenal. He's an important figure in the foundation of death metal, but I don't believe this band invented it. Because coming in at number 15 is Possessed. Now, these guys have only done about 3 albums. Their first album, Seven Churches, is considered by some to be the first death metal album ever, and I agree with that. They followed it up with Beyond the Gates, and it didn't live up to expectations at the time, but today it's considered to be an underrated classic. They did an EP, The Eyes of Horror, but unfortunately they disbanded after the lead singer, Jeff Becker, was paralyzed after being shot during a robbery. So they disbanded, and that may sound unfortunate, but decades later, in 2019, they made a huge comeback with Revelations of Oblivion. And even though Jeff Becker was paralyzed, his vocals have gotten much better, and he can still perform despite his condition. If that's not a story for the ages, then I don't know what is. But aside from that, their music is just awesome, and I can't wait to see what they do next. So coming in at number 14 is going to be Napalm Death. This is one of the most diverse extreme metal bands I've ever come across. Their first album, Scum, is considered by, I'd say, most people to be the first grindcore album, and they did that for 2 albums. Then they transitioned into death metal with Harmony Corruption. They did that for 2 albums, and then they began transitioning into groove metal, which became popular in the 90s with albums like Fear, Emptiness, Despair, Diatribes, and Inside the Torn Apart. From that point onwards, they began transitioning back to death metal and grindcore, and for the rest of their career, they've been focusing on those 2 genres, but every once in a while they'll throw in groove metal, and they're still active today. And, you know, as of this recording, they've released 16 studio albums. That's quite an achievement. So not only do they have a ton of content for fans to enjoy, but they're a very consistent band and very diverse. Coming in at number 13 is In Flames. These guys started out doing melodic death metal, and they were actually pretty good, and a part of me wishes they had stuck with that. Because after 5 albums, they transitioned into mainstream alternative metal, and they've been doing that ever since, and I doubt they'll ever return to their melodic death metal roots, but I don't think they need to. Regardless of what they put out, it's always fantastic. Not only is this another great band from Sweden, but their frontman and lead singer Anders Frieden has one of the best voices in heavy metal history, in my opinion. I mean, when they transitioned to alternative metal, he even changed up his vocal style, and it totally blew my mind. And yeah, all the more reason to put them on this list. So, coming in at number 12 is Iron Maiden. One of the best heavy metal bands of all time, period, let alone traditional heavy metal. These guys have had multiple singers, they have played around with guitar synthesizers and melodic metal and stuff like that, but they've remained, for the most part, consistent. And they have had a huge influence on the genre. This is one of those bands that unfortunately got caught up in some nonsensical controversy in the 80s with their third album, Number of the Beast. I mean, you know, aside from the title, just the album cover says it all. But these guys are not a satanic band, everybody knows that. They're one of the best bands ever. They even have their very own mascots in the form of Eddie. They are fun to watch on tour, from what I've heard, and they even came to South Africa once, and I wish I was there, I really do. And I hope to see them live someday. They're amazing. So yeah, they're my number 12. Coming in at number 11 is Judas Priest. Now, when I first started getting into Iron Maiden and Judas Priest, I preferred Iron Maiden. I guess it was their sound, really. You know, from the get-go, they knew who they were. Meanwhile, Judas Priest took a while to find themselves, but when they did, they remained consistent for decades. Their lead singer, Rob Halford, has the voice of a literal metal god. I guess that's why everybody refers to him as the metal god. I mean, he was around before Metallica, Megadeth, and even Iron Maiden. Believe it or not, they actually started out doing hard rock. As I said earlier, they were still finding themselves. Then they transitioned into heavy metal, but it was very dark and complex, and then they transitioned to something more mainstream, and that's when they found themselves. They do play around with hard rock, and they even recorded a symphonic metal album, and it's good to see them experimenting from time to time. It may not always work, but it's still entertaining for the most part. Tim Ripper Owens, filled in for Rob Halford for about 2 albums, and there was a song he did on the album Jugulator, Born in Hell, which is awesome. Really, really good. And they still make music today with their most recent effort, Firepower, coming out in 2018, and I cannot wait to hear what they have next. They are just phenomenal and so much fun to listen to.